Hi, I'm Bowditch and I've got Korani here with me, and I'm just going to give you a little intro into Korani. So Korani has been traveling a conscious spiritual path for many years and has trained in a variety of different healing modalities. But the one that has really captured her heart is color mirrors, an extraordinary system that uses color to help people discover a higher view about who they are and what they are here for. The combination of her love for color mirrors and her passion for writing led to her first book, The Language of Light, in 2009. She has subsequently written 2 ebooks based around the color mirrors system and co-authored the book, The Wisdom of Color Mirrors, with Melissie, who is the creator of the system. Korani loves to inspire people to discover their own inner light and to follow their own unique path. Her joy is to assist people through her workshops and programs to open and awaken to a life that is based on simple yet profound qualities such as love, peace, joy, and inner freedom. Some years ago, she asked Melissie to create a set of starlight essences and oils to capture their qualities in tangible form. Their sparkling colours remind us that we carry these qualities within ourselves and have access to them all of the time if we can learn to become conscious of them. The Starlights help us to welcome in a new paradigm, taking us beyond perceived limitations into a clearer, lighter, higher way of being. And I actually met Korani through Color Mirrors. She was my tutor, and it was an amazing experience, the practitioner training, and it just completely opened my eyes to the more spiritual world, actually, because I got into the colors because they were used on me by a therapist, and I was amazed as I took an inhale of the essence how that just completely released any negative feeling I had, like virtually instantly. I just remember it sort of going like that, and I just thought, wow, these are amazing, this is weird, but I have to find out more. So, and that was my introduction to colors. And then 2 months later, I was on this training course and I was like, what am I doing here? It was amazing. So obviously you've evolved hugely, Korani, through your color mirrors sort of transition, and you still are evolving. So what is now the foundation of your work?
Thank you, Anne. It's so lovely to be talking to you today. And I remember vividly you coming on the course and just, how exciting it was to see you connecting with colour and what it did for you. So Colour Mirrors has been a huge part of my life and will continue to be, and of my work. It's something that I use for myself ongoingly and that I'm always using in whatever work I do, because it's so empowering and it's so inspiring. And it's just so useful and helpful at helping people to shift old patterns or behaviors or whatever it is that they're wanting to shift in their lives. What I found over recent years is that I'm less now involved in the training side of things, where I used to run lots of practitioner training, teacher training, and so on. I'm no longer doing that. And instead, what I'm doing is using color as a support, if you like, an incredible support and foundation for the work that I do, which tends to be, at the moment, certainly online workshops. I don't do one-to-one work anymore. It's all group work. And that's really my passion, is to work with groups and to help people to find a place where they can live, as you said it so beautifully in the introduction, where they can live more from a place of peace inside themselves, where they can find a sense of freedom in their lives, where they can discover that love is the foundation of life. You know, those kind of very, in some ways, esoteric qualities, but in some ways, really, truly, deeply, the foundation of who we are and what we came here to rediscover. I think that humanity as a whole has kind of perhaps evolved away from living life like that and has lived the life much more from the mind and from the ego. And I guess that a lot of my work is about bringing people back into the heart bringing people back to a space where they can discover what they love and why, and then to help them to use their passions and the things that they most connect with to then take that out into the world in some way.
Yes, I mean, from the heart is something that we hear more and more often, and we hear about different sort of heart therapies and coming from the heart. So for somebody who might be very in their head, how can you maybe explain that a little bit more to them, or maybe a little intro into how can they begin that journey into that heart space?
Yeah, so I think as you said, so many people do live from their head and are kind of based on, their lives are based on their thoughts and their emotions. I think for a lot of people, the first step into living from the heart is to experience something. And so a lot of my work is experiential. It's about helping people actually have an experience, because for me to try and describe it in words, I will certainly give it my best shot. But for most people, coming into the heart is really an experience that they have. It's a sensation, perhaps it's a feeling, an emotion, a tangible kind of feeling that they have, but it's something that in some ways can only really be known once it's experienced. So my work will often help people through kind of gentle meditations or guidance to bring their focus into that space inside their body that is at the center of their chest. It's maybe what some people might refer to as the heart chakra. And this is a place where when we bring attention there, gently and gradually over time, we start to learn what it feels like to be in a place that is centered, that is balanced, that is harmonious, that just feels right, that just feels peaceful and feels true. And then when we start to live from that place more and more, then we base our lives on that, rather than being reactive, rather than kind of getting into judgment and blame and shame and guilt. We start to step more into just seeing everything through the eyes of love. And I know that sounds kind of whimsical, perhaps, but it's amazing what a difference it makes to your life when you start to see through the eyes of love instead of judgment and blame. So for people who are kind of more head-based, and I certainly came from a background of being very head, I really was all up in my head completely back in the day. And it was really something like color. And in fact, Reiki, I think, was the first thing that started to really tap me into my heart. So energy therapies, of which color is an amazing one, as you know, Anne. Anything like that, gentle meditations, guided meditations can really help us to start to experience what it is to live in the heart. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There's an unfortunate echo on here, but hopefully it's not going to be too much of a problem to people listening in. Yeah, from the heart. I mean, I remember, I think it was doing your Heartfire series once. Something that I actually took into my work with my clients was something that you said on there was, what if you bring love in? And I use this a lot myself. And again, it's just something that I've passed on to a lot of my clients, because the way that I see it is, if we're in anger, if we're in frustration, whatever that, if you like, what we refer to as sort of negative feelings, the feelings we don't like, or even anxiety, as well. If we're in those types of emotions, if we can ask the question, what if I bring love in? Then we've connected with love. We might not completely shift out of that place in an instant, particularly because this is a process. It's a learning process, isn't it? It's not an instant fix as such. And that's something I might speak to you about in a moment as well. But I feel like if we can ask the question and just take a moment, and I think that's what's so important about all of these types of, what should we call them, more energy type treatments, is it is about giving time to them and commitment to them. But if we can just ask that question in that moment, what if I bring love in? Then we've changed the energy. Is that exactly how you see it?
Yeah, that's really beautifully put, Anne. And Yeah, I would completely agree with you that it's not something that we just suddenly one day start doing and everything changes and then life is wonderful. It doesn't really work like that. But as you say, just as we ask the questions, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm such a fan of questions, and it's something that I bring into all the work that I do, is always asking questions to help you to get more clarity and to help you to maybe see things slightly differently, because we do very much as humans get locked into our habitual grooves, don't we? Our habitual ways of thinking, our habitual ways of doing things. And a question can just open things up, just make us stop and think, I wonder if there is another way. And so to bring a question in and something like, what would love do here? Or how can I bring love into this? It can be, as you said, if it can just make you pause for a second, that's incredibly empowering. And even if you still then go and react the way that you might have reacted anyway, you've just given yourself a little moment, which maybe the next time you'll then take a slightly longer moment and actually be able to breathe a little bit more deeply and feel a little bit more empowered when you respond, rather than just jumping straight out with a kind of, with anger or frustration or what have you. So
yeah. And I think it's, don't give up at that first sort of hurdle, if you like. If you try it and then you think, well, that didn't work, keep at it, because these things work almost, we talk a lot about things like layers of an onion, and I wish we had a different metaphor. Sometimes you might have some other nicer metaphors, but it is about just peeling those layers away or creating these new layers that are much more positive, and dipping into these, as you say, these really wonderful energies. And just going back to the colors, and your work is becoming sort of almost more about the energy itself than the tangible color, but the colors sort of say it in a great way for anybody who may need that tangible object still. Is when clients come into my studio and all my lovely color bottles are out there, and we've got 87 oils in the main system, and I lose count of how many essences, but an awful lot. I always say to them, whether they're sort of spiritually minded or not, this system is about everything that we want in our lives. And whether you've got color or you don't have color, it's the same thing. We want peace, we want love, we want joy, we want to release judgment. We don't want to be feeling guilty about every little thing we do. We want to create a really nice experience on earth. And I think we can get too lost in the day-to-day mundane that we actually lose track of that. We go so far away from it, because particularly parents, if they've got kids, they've got to get kids to school, they've got to get to work themselves, they've got to run all these chores. So how can people in their daily life just begin to tap into this? Because it is wonderful. It's a shame if people don't have an opportunity or create that opportunity to get into this, because it's such a learning experience, and the deeper you go into it and the more you apply yourself to it, definitely the more you get out of it. So how can people maybe begin to get into it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that people do often get lost in the kind of just the mundane details of everyday life. And so one of the things I've always loved about the color mirrors system is because it is a physical, tangible thing. So you've got, I'm just going to show you one of the spritzers here. This one's a fiery one, beautiful, rich orange. Because it's something it's colorful, it's physical, you actually have to hold it and take off the lid and give yourself a spritz of it. It's something that is very present and very practical. So for me, often I'll say to people when they've had a session or they've come on a workshop or what have you, I'll say to them, which one of these, if it's sat in your home, on your windowsill, on your mantelpiece, by your bed, wherever, would help you remember the things we've talked about in this workshop? That we've talked about the more spiritual side of life and kind of opening up more and being more centered and more content and all those things. And so quite often people will say, oh, you know what, that blue one really makes me feel peaceful and still and quiet inside. So I'm going to take that home with me, and then it will remind me. And so something that just acts as a reminder, and of course it doesn't have to be a color mirrors bottle, it's just that they're incredibly useful and beautiful, and they also have this energy component to them, which makes them more than just a pretty color. But it could be a crystal, it could be a painting, it could be an object of some description that just helps you to take a breath, that helps you just to remember to close your eyes for a moment and just pause, and to kind of tap into something greater than just the day-to-day kind of mundanity of everyday life. So for different people, it's different things. I know that a lot of people are drawn to something like Reiki, a kind of energy therapy, or maybe they're drawn to EFT, emotional freedom technique, which can be really empowering. It doesn't matter what it is. I think it's just finding something that floats your boat, something that kind of really makes you think, oh, I'm intrigued by that. I'm interested. I want to know more. I mean, reading books about it is great, but there's nothing that beats an actual tangible experience. So coming on a workshop, you know, an online workshop or in person when we can do those again, is always a really fantastic way to go from, I don't know what this is all about, to, now I'm starting to see what this is all about. Again, coming back to what I said earlier, so often it's an experience that does it, rather than somebody writing it or somebody telling you, well, it's like this. So often it's actually about you having a tangible experience of it, and then using something to remind you of that, so that you remember in your daily life to take a minute here or there. And I know that it's very, very simple, but for a lot of people, it's the breath. Actually, it's just starting to come back to focus on the breath, in breath, out breath, and just to remember that that's going on all the time behind the busyness of the mind and behind the busyness of your life. Your heart's beating constantly and your breath is going in and out constantly. And there's something about coming back to the physical breath that actually helps you to remember that there is something beyond the mind. I think when you get very wrapped up in the mind, and like I say, I certainly know what that's like, we forget we've even got a body. We forget we've even got breath. You know, that this body is just maintaining itself ongoingly all the time. And I think something about just tapping back into the breath or the body, and of course I would add to that, going out in nature is just a huge, huge gift. And just taking a look up at the sky, even if it's cloudy, sometimes just the physical act of looking up takes you out of this, and the kind of being so kind of closeted in your thoughts, or going and just looking at some flowers in a garden, or standing beside a tree, you know, something physical that reminds you that there's something else beyond the mind, is incredibly powerful. But I found, you know, as we've talked about earlier, and as you indicated, and the color is just such an incredibly empowering and beautiful and fun and lovely way to do it, that, you know, that's obviously one of my favorite ways to help people to get in touch with all of this.
Yes, what I was going to say about that is, sometimes, you know, it's interesting you talk about those in effect very basic things in life, the breath, the flowers, the sky. And actually what I find is, when I do get out of my head, and I'm still very much in my head, much more than I sort of want to be, but when I do we went for a walk on the beach yesterday evening, and it was so nice. And I wasn't going to do that because I said to my husband, oh, I've got too much to do. And then I realized that I needed to do it for my own well-being, actually. So I did. And I'm really pleased that I did. So actually, also what that does for me is remind myself that actually a lot of the things that are going on in my head are not really that significant in the great scheme of things, and that actually in life, as a general rule, we don't need a lot. You know, yes, it's nice to have shelter, it's nice to have some companionship, and it's also nice, obviously we want to be fed, and it's nice to have some warmth, but we don't need huge amounts in life. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the complexities of life and in everything that we sort of want to achieve, that we lose ourselves in all of that. And having been somebody who was involved in sport for many, many years, I can see how that happens, whether it's from a point of view of trying to be the best parent, or whether it's wanting that career and getting to the top in your career, or whatever it is. I think we can lose ourselves in actually almost our ambitions, which sounds like a strange thing, because we always look on ambition as a good thing, but maybe not if it takes too much from us.
I think that's absolutely right. And as someone who's been quite driven at different times in my life, I totally relate to that as well. And what I've discovered over the years is that connecting with a deeper aspect of myself and life, if you want to call it that, spiritual side of life, has in fact supported me and contributed to my work and whatever I've been wanting to do far more than when I was trying to do it all from a place of push, push, push and rush, rush, rush and stress and strive and all of those things. That actually taking the times out, taking the times to focus on the breath, on going out walking, on being in nature, on taking time for reflection and meditation and all those things has actually enhanced my life to such a point where like you said, I don't need as much in my life anymore. I'm just very happy with this. In fact, this whole lockdown has just been a gift. It's been a blessing to live a really simplified version of my life. But it's also enhanced whatever I have wanted to do. So it's not like focusing on the spiritual path or opening to your higher self or whatever you want to call it is going to take you away from the things you want in life. In fact, it's going to give them to you more gently, with more grace, with more ease, with more joy. And in fact, you mentioned in the introduction that I had asked the creator of Colour Mirrors, my wonderful friend Melissie, to make me a set of Starlight essences and oils. Because she's already got, as you said, Anne, there are 87 of these beautiful Colour Mirrors oils and about 40 something of the beautiful essences. So did we really need more? Probably not. But there was something in me that was asking for these very simple qualities to be put into colour form. And so the first three I asked Melissie for were love, peace and joy. I said, could you make me one called Starlight Love, Starlight Peace and Starlight Joy? And the reason that I connected with Starlight is because Starlight's so uplifting. It's such a mysterious energy. We really don't know that much about the stars, and they help us. Again, if we look up at a starry sky at night, doesn't that just take you out of yourself, takes you out of your small kind of focus on your everyday life and helps you remember that there's a vast, vast universe out there. And so I asked her to make these three for me. And so I'm just going to show you, we've got Starlight. Oh, that's not showing up very clearly, is it? But
like
it's actually
pale
very
pink.
soft pink. Yeah.
And that's got the turquoise sparkles, is it?
It has got turquoise sparkles in it. And I don't have peace with me. It's a pale blue, but then we've got joy, which is this lovely rich yellow. And peace is a pale blue. And they were the first three to be created. And I remember, much like you said earlier, I remember when they first came through, thinking to myself, really all anybody wants in life is love, peace and joy. That's kind of it. We want to be happy. We want to feel a sense of peace within ourselves, so we're not in conflict all the time. And love is kind of to me, it's the foundation of everything. It's the be all and end all. It's where everything begins and ends. Without love, who are we? What would life be without love? So I asked her to create these essences so that we could really focus and help use the color and the essences and the energy of them to help us to really tune into those things so that they could become a part of our everyday lives. So it's not like we're having to go on retreat to find them or go on a workshop to find them, but that we can actually remember that they're there all the time anyway. Just like the breath, love is always there and peace is always there. Believe it or not, it's always there inside you. And so what things like color and meditation and Reiki and healing and all those things can do is to help us just to remember what was already there in the first place, but that we've lost sight of.
Completely. I do remember some time after doing my practitioner training. So I'd been working with colours, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And I was literally feeling more inner peace. And it's something that's very hard to sort of put into any sort of context or to explain to someone. As you said, you sort of have to experience it for yourself. But I noticed that I had a much more peaceful feel about me. I wasn't maybe responding and reacting as much to life events. I was much calmer about a lot of things. And that was just such a wonderful feeling. And I find with the colours, and again, colours are sort of a tangible way of this, but it can be anything. But what that did for me is as you say, one thing is it makes you just ask questions a little bit more. Why am I feeling that way? Why am I reacting that way? What's this really about? What's underneath all of this? What could be the bigger picture? Those sorts of questions, but also those good feelings that you can get. And another key one that I can't say 100% it was colour mirrors that did this for me, but I know it was, is when we talk about I amness and we talk about the solar plexus, which is, we know that as our energy center, which is just below the rib cage. And that's where our confidence and our self-esteem is. Every so often, I just have this feeling that any old crap could be going on around me and I'll be fine. And again, I can't put that any other way. And it's not necessarily the most elegant way of putting it, but actually that's the feeling that I get. And so when you do spend time, and I'm lucky because I get to work with these for a lot of my day, and I'm sat in a room with them when I'm working in my studio. So I feel really fortunate. And as I think you remember, that all around my house, and my house has become the colour house because I loved it all so much, that actually it's a constant unconscious reminder as well, isn't it? And the more that you do this type of, I call it work, but it's not work, but the more that you experience all of this, the more natural it becomes to dip into it, isn't it? And then you just get another uplift, something else happens, and it's part of what you've been working with. Would you say that you find that to be the case?
Oh, very much so. I mean, if I look back to my days pre all of this and how my life was then, it wasn't like I had a terrible life, not at all, but it was very, very different. And I was very different. And I'm a lot happier with who I am now and the way my life is. And I've just learned so much. And I think that's one of the amazing things about being on a healing path, or a spiritual path, whatever you want to call it, is just how much you grow ongoingly through it. And you said before, it's not work, and in one way it's absolutely not, but in one way there is also a component to this that is very much about work. It's about being willing to put the inner work in. It doesn't just happen by itself. That's something I will say. I think a lot of people think that if they start opening up spiritually, their lives are just going to transform overnight and everything will be wonderful. And wouldn't that be great? But what would we learn? Kind of nothing, really. And so I do see that this is very much a growth path. There can be huge rewards along the way, don't get me wrong, but there is a component to actually being willing to say, you know what, I have got patterns and issues and challenges that I am struggling with, and I don't know how to deal with them, and maybe I need some help. And that's where reaching out to someone like you, Anne, is just fantastic, for helping people to starting to get on track. And then maybe for a lot of people, I think it's having some kind of therapy or healing that actually opens them up spiritually. It certainly was for me. I had stuff going on in my life that I didn't know what to do with, and it manifested in physical ailments, which it so often does. So often people have physical stuff going wrong with their body, and they say, why can't I just fix my body by changing my diet or by exercising more or by what have you? And then they start to realize that it's not just about their physical body at all, but it's maybe there's some stuck emotions somewhere, repressed emotions, there's issues that they haven't dealt with from childhood and so on. And so there is a path and there is work to be done. And I think once we're willing to step on that path, then quite often what will happen is that we then start to recognize that there is more to life than just what we see and hear and can touch, that there is another dimension to life, that opens us up beyond just the physical form and the thoughts and the mind.
Yeah, and I think, being on that spiritual path, it doesn't stop bad things happening to you as we see them as bad things, but it helps you see them from a different perspective, and it also helps you through them, doesn't it, to almost pull on these resources of love, peace, joy that were always there for us, but that we disconnected from, really. And really that's a lot of what this type of work is about, isn't it? It's reconnecting with something that's always been there, but we've disconnected so much, we don't really know what it would be like to feel that fully. And I always think at the top end of that, you're talking about people like the Dalai Lama, aren't you? Somebody who just is fully in tune with that. The rest of us are sort of somewhere on that journey, you know. And I know with myself, I can get annoyed about life experiences, and then in another moment I can be a lot more zen, as we know it. But so it's a bit up and down. But again, I know from my perspective, I don't do what I think is sufficient work, because I'm still too much in the head, in the doing, and not the being. And talking of being, there's a very special starlight. I don't know if you've got it with you today, but it's one that I'll never forget the day that you brought this out in a workshop. And you were wearing those colours as well, so you've given it away, really. Yes. And it's got the gold, hasn't it? It's got the gold sparkles. And what part of what I really tuned into with this essence was, apart from the fact that the gold and magenta looks so amazing, it wasn't so much the scent actually, but the words. They just, and even now I get such a strong emotional response to even thinking about the words. And what I find also interesting about that is, as I said, I'm still too, in my mind, I'm still too much in the doing. I'm still too much in my head. I've got to do this, I've got to do that. I'm not being enough. And I've noticed telling myself, whether it's because I knew I was going to be talking to you, but I've noticed the last few days I need to do less, I need to sit more, and that sort of thing. So maybe it's a little bit of unconscious awareness. But is there anything you can tell us about that essence and about the state of being, just again as a bit of explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always known that this one was, huge for you, Anne, and it certainly was for me too when it came through, because what happened was, after those initial 3 essences, it actually grew so that there were 16 of the essences, the sprays, and 8 oils, 8 of the round bottles. So there's a set of 24 which make up the Starlights. And being came along kind of partway through that process, about halfway through the process, I think. And each of the new ones that arrived was really just an inspiration. It was just a sense of, oh, I know what the next one's going to be, and I could see what the color was, and then I would ask Melissie to make it for me. This one is called Starlight Being. And as you said, Anne, it's something that so many of us are really terrible at. We're more like starlight doers, we're more like human doers, in fact, rather than human beings. And again, I know completely what that's like. I was very much a doer in my head, and all about the doing all the time. Never took the time that I needed to stop ever, really, if I could avoid it. And I think that's kind of the key, is that what we often do is we be and be and be. We do and do and do to stop us from what might happen if we stopped just to be. So the essence of being is to recognize that there is this wellspring of love and light and peace and happiness within us. That is our core, that is our essence, that is the truth at the heart of who we really are. And that is our state of being, our pure natural truth. All the doing tends to arise from, yes, the needs of the body, but also from the mind. And so what that does effectively is it masks us from that pure and natural state of being, but it also masks us, and we use this as a protective mechanism. It stops us from having to feel, which is the thing that most of us don't want to do. Yes, we want to feel happiness, and we want to feel joy, and we want to feel peace and love and all those things, but we do not want to feel all the other emotions, as you called them earlier, so-called negative emotions. And we know in truth that none of them are actually negative. They're all just teachers. They're helping us to learn things. But we see them as negative, and we fear them, and we don't want to go there. And so we do and we do and we do to keep ourselves busy, to stop ourselves from actually getting in touch with those emotions. And so what happens when we start to be, in other words, we take time to just meditate, or to just relax, or to go out walking in nature, or to do whatever, to be, just to take time just to actually be with life rather than be constantly doing. When we take that time, sometimes what can happen is that things we've hidden about ourselves, things we haven't wanted to look at, things we haven't wanted to address, can rise to the surface. And so we tend to avoid that at all costs by keeping in the doing lane. And this is the work that I was talking about, is we do actually at some point, those things are not going to go away by us wanting them to go away, and they're not going to go away by us ignoring them. In fact, they'll probably start knocking louder and louder on our doors, which is what, you know, inevitably leads people to come for healing or therapy in the first place. Is they start to get a wake-up call. You know, something knocks pretty loudly. In my case, it was my body. My body just said, you can't carry on like this, you have to stop. And you know, we get forced into it because we don't want to go there by ourselves. If we can start learning the signals from our body, from our heart, from our inner being, we can start to recognize those signals of something's a bit off here. I need to stop and I need to find out what's going on and ask some of those bigger questions. Then we can create a space where healing can start to happen and release can start to happen. And then the more we do that, the more we can find that that can happen more gently, more easily, more simply, and we don't have to go through big traumatic kind of releases. Maybe initially there will be a lot of, you know, hard work and of healing that needs to happen, depending on how much has been suppressed, how much has been hidden deep down inside us. But the more that we can do that clearing work, that releasing work, that healing work, then we start to create a much more peaceful space to just be.
Completely.
If that makes sense.
And what's on the other side of that is lovely, isn't it? You know, even, you know, whether you're somebody who can predominantly live in that nice way of the love, peace, joy, and the being, or whether you're somebody who dips in and out more so because you're still sort of somewhere in the middle, you know, it's still great to know that it is there. Something that I've found through my work is occasionally doing that, you know, bigger work, getting those initial sort of issues resolved, the ones that are really disrupting your life. For some people, it feels like such a major task, but actually, in many ways, often it's not always as major as you think it's going to be. It's just, yes, it might conjure up a little bit of emotion or sometimes a lot of emotion, but actually, very often with these types of energy therapies, or, you know, similar to like the EFT or as I use the hypnotherapy type side of things, you don't necessarily have to go too deep into those events. You can almost go around the parameters of them, resolve it, and then you're moving on. So I think it's also not to be fearful of going there, because there's so many different ways to do it, aren't there? Because sometimes we don't even tap into a particular event. We might just be tapping into a feeling or a belief. You know, beliefs are huge. I mean, that's a huge part of my work. So, you know, a belief for somebody might be, I'm not good enough. That's like a really common belief. And it's so fundamental, I find, to so many issues that people have, you know, whether it's a confidence issue, maybe an anxiety, relationship issues, those sorts of things. Is our belief something that you would sort of draw on quite a lot in your work, or is it slightly different angle?
No, absolutely. I think you're quite right. A lot of people are holding beliefs and not even knowing that they have those beliefs, not even realizing. And one of the things I've seen over and over and over again with color is how swiftly and powerfully those limiting beliefs can be drawn to the surface by people simply choosing a color. And then the therapist being able to help them to interpret what that color is saying about what's going on inside. And then using the colored oils and essences, again, it might sound a bit peculiar, but literally, as you had with one of your initial experiences, literally watching those emotions and those beliefs start to transform kind of in front of your eyes. And I have just seen it so many times in my work, because I did do a lot of one-to-one work back in the day, and certainly in workshops as well. I've seen how those beliefs can be transformed, as you said, and it's not always going to have to be a traumatic or a dreadful experience. Oftentimes it's nowhere near as bad as people think it's going to be. And in fact, it's the resistance that makes it really bad. You know, you actually struggle more before you do it than once you say, right, I'm going to take my courage in my hands and I am going to do it. And I am going to face this and address it. And then you start to set yourself free, and it's extraordinary what happens then. That, you know, you can start to open up to all, as you said, the more wonderful things in life. And then you can discover things like bliss. you know, and incredible peace within you, and real happiness, true happiness that's not dependent on outer circumstances. Most of the time we're happy when things are going right, and we're unhappy when things are not going right. But what I've discovered, and I'm discovering more and more because I'm still learning all the time, what I'm discovering is how that deep foundation of inner kind of contentment and peace is not something that gets shaken by what happens on the in the outside world. It can do, you know, if it's a bit kind of wobbly, as you said, if we're kind of coming and going in and out of that space, then yeah, we can absolutely get knocked off course by something that's happened in our outer world. But I find that the more that I come back to that resource, come back to that place inside me, the less disturbed I am by what's going on around me. And the more that I can see, and this is very much one of my favorite sayings, is I can see the bigger picture. You know, I think for me, it's always about seeing the bigger picture rather than getting lost in the detail. And I'm a very detail oriented person. I'm a Gemini. I'm kind of always focusing on the detail, and have always been very mind oriented. And so for me to learn how to be more and to be less focused on that small picture and to be focused more on the big picture has been huge, been absolutely massive, and a transformation in my life.
So can you explain a little bit more what you mean by the bigger picture, so that, you know, anybody who's never experienced anything like this might understand a little bit more?
Yeah, so when something happens to us in our lives, we tend to react emotionally. You know, so say if somebody close to us leaves, or if we lose our job, or if there's a huge conflict going on in the family, all we tend to feel is, this is horrible and I hate it. I don't want to be here. It just feels awful. We have horrible feelings coming up inside us. We have lots of thoughts about, was it my fault? Did I do something wrong? Or that person shouldn't have done what they did. We go into judgment and blame. We quite often go into guilt, and, you know, I should have done more for that person, you know, and we go round and round, don't we? You'll all recognize the kind of things I'm talking about. What happens when we start to take a higher view or go to the bigger picture is we step out. And I kind of always say we step up and out rather than being in and down. You know, when we're in the mind and looking down and looking kind of focused on the minutiae, on the detail of what's going on, all we can see is the stuff that we think we can see. When we start to take a breath, to take a step back, to, you know, maybe take ourselves out of the situation and go and reflect, and look up at the sky, and to remember that we're part of something greater, to what we start to do is to see, maybe there's a reason why this is happening. Maybe there's a bigger reason why this is happening. Maybe there's something I'm being encouraged to learn here about myself, about life, about other people. Maybe that person's pressing my buttons because there's a button inside me that's waiting to be pressed that I haven't addressed yet. You know, I always say to people, when people say, oh, that person really pressed my buttons, I will say very gently and with lots of love, do you think that's maybe because there's a button there that's, you know, been waiting to be pressed? And it's like, actually, in some ways, that person is giving you a gift. And I know that can sound bonkers and really hard to get your head around. But what if there really was a gift in this situation? What if there was something that you're being encouraged to learn here and to grow from and to evolve through, so that you could actually become a more balanced, rounded, more content and happy and peaceful person? So it is something that does take a bit of getting your head around. And I know that people often, when they come new to this stuff, will just say, no, I'm sorry, but no, there was, you know, that was wrong and it shouldn't have happened. And I get that, I really do. But what would happen if you just took a moment to say, what if it wasn't wrong? What if the universe actually had a message here for me? What if there was a bigger picture waiting for me? What if there was a deeper meaning to this that I just didn't know about before? And what if I knew a little bit about that, I could actually change things in this situation, or I could change how I react or respond to the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just mesmerized by all of that, because it's so true. I think the bigger picture, it's something that is there for all of us. And if I think about all of my most challenging experiences in life, the things that at the time were downright horrible, and yes, at the time, if you said you don't have to go through this, I'd be like, okay, where's the outdoor? I'd take it, of course I would. But actually, if I look at those experiences now, I can say, yeah, I grew from that, or that caused me to take a diversion. And thank goodness I took that diversion, because that was so right for me. The year I got into the colours was what I refer to actually as my annus horribilis. It was my horrible year. But goodness, what great timing. My father had died 3 days before I started my practitioner training. And, it was obviously a hugely emotional time. But I also knew for some reason the timing was perfect. I knew that those colours helped me through that process so much easier. And this was almost like not exactly a whirlwind for me, because as we say, it's not like that, but because it was all so new, and the more spiritual side was so new to me, it all sort of happened at once. It did give me other perspectives at the time that I'm so grateful for, because I think it would have been a much tougher experience. And it enabled me, I always say I took my own advice, and we often don't take our own advice, do we? And through the grief that I experienced with my dad, I allowed myself to experience that, rather than my normal response would be, let's just push that away. Let's leave that alone for now. Tough upper lip. And actually it was interesting, because I remember on the day of my dad's funeral, my mum saying, "You've got to be strong." She wasn't necessarily telling me I had to be strong, but just generally, you've got to be strong. So no wonder I have that belief that I have to be strong. So it just brings you something else to the mix, that it will be your own unique experience, won't it? You can't say necessarily to somebody, well, this is what you get when you embark on this journey. You can't give them a checklist, because it's unique to all of us. And if I look at, the people that I know most through this experience, which were probably mostly the people that I did my practitioner training with, and a few others, we all brought something to the table, something very different. And what was also really interesting is, and I didn't realize this so much at the time, is we were all looking at each other in a very nice way, thinking, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing, but not realizing it in ourselves as well. And I think we were all sat there feeling that we were inferior to the other people on the course. And yet each one of us was doing that. And isn't that interesting that we were on this, if you like, journey and experience, and yet we were all sort of had all those insecurities within us. So it's a bit of a sort of waffle and a statement. I don't know if I've actually asked you a question there, but yeah, I mean, you've obviously trained so many people, through your, either whether it's been sort of practitioner or teacher training or running courses and workshops. What do you notice most, about the changes that you see in people, or have there been any particular experiences that you can sort of talk about? Is there anything you can share?
Oh my gosh, so much, Anne, because it's been probably 15 years that I've been doing this training work, and both the sort of concentrated training programs and then just more general spiritual workshops. And there is still one that sticks out in my mind the most, which was fairly early on in my teaching career, when somebody came on a workshop because a friend had told them that they were going to be working with color, and this person really didn't know anything more than that, and they had always loved color, and so they thought, yeah, that's great, and they didn't realize that it was going to be quite as full-on sort of opening to the spiritual world as it would be with me, because that's my focus. And this person went through everything from the sublime to the ridiculous over the course of a weekend, where they faced parts of themselves they had never faced before. they woke up to their own innate spiritual energy and the truth of who they were. They saw things that they had never experienced before, and they understood things at a level that they knew in some way, but they had never been able to actually really kind of verbalize it or bring it into, into concentrated focus. And this person just left after the first weekend kind of transformed, and we all just had our jaws hanging down watching them over the course of the 2 days, watching how they just literally woke up in front of our eyes from being somebody who didn't really know much about anything to just having an extraordinary capacity. Now, this person was already extraordinary, as we all are, and that's one of the things I love about color, as you pointed out. And everybody that comes to this work always has this incredible gift that nobody else has, but they're usually the last person to be able to see it. We can usually hardly see, we can't see what's so great about ourselves when everybody else says, "You're so amazing," and we go, "Don't be ridiculous, come on, what are you talking about?" Other people can see our gifts and blessings so much more than we can. And what I think I've noticed over the years is that people have started to wake up to their own innate goodness, their own innate kind of light, as I call it, that they aren't this terrible, unworthy, guilty, struggling person. That yes, they've been through struggles, but those struggles don't define them, and their experiences in life don't define them. And if that was the only thing I could give to somebody, it would be the ability to know that their thoughts and their feelings and their challenges and their struggles do not define them. That would be the thing I would want for everyone, that they actually can find this place inside themselves where they can actually honor and recognize and acknowledge and even love who they are on the inside. That would be my greatest gift to offer. And I have seen that. I've seen that in people so many times over the years, where they have actually come from a place of feeling completely that they don't deserve anything good, or that life is just horrible. And I know people who have just kind of gone, "Get me out, I don't want to be here." I have also had those times back in my younger days where I did not want to be on this planet. I thought, "It's too hard here. Just let me out. Beam me up, Scotty." Truly, I just wanted out. I was never going to do anything about it, but I didn't want to be here. And I know so many people who have that. People who would rather be hanging out in the stars than be here on the earth. And what I've seen over the years is, particularly when these starlight essences and oils came in to land, as it were, so many of those, as we call them, starry people, went, "Oh, thank God." It's like, here is what I've been waiting for, and here is what I've been looking for. I've been looking for this level of kind of inner lightness all my life, and I didn't know that it existed, and now it does. And I think that's been one of the greatest joys of the work that I've done over the years, has been to see people start to light up inside.
Absolutely. And my cat Daisy completely agrees with you. I don't know if you can hear her. Yeah, I mean, the starlights are just something very, very special. But I loved what you said there about, our experiences don't define us, and that there is, I do fully believe, like, so deeply, that there's something great in everybody. And I don't feel it's like I must believe this. I just know that I believe it. And I think very often people are so defined by something they might have been told they are, particularly at a young age. That belief gets so deeply embedded, or for whatever reason they've come to believe that they're not good enough, or that they're, I don't know, weird or whatever, something that they don't like about themselves. And I do fully believe that there is brilliance in everybody. And if you follow, I always just try and encourage people to follow their passions. I think that's really important. There is one final thing I'd like to ask you, just to maybe elaborate on, is judgment, because I feel like at the moment, I notice this so much locally in Guernsey, that we're in lockdown at the moment, and we see things that maybe we don't like, or we think something should be done differently, completely that's me in certain situations as well. So I'm not saying other people are, I'm saying I'm doing it as much as everybody else. But how can we step out of judgment, and what would that do for us?
That's such a great question, and something that I've kind of grappled with for so many years on my path. Not because I was ever a hugely judgmental person, but like you, it of course exists in me as it does in everybody. And it's such a human trait, isn't it? To the first thing we do when we see something we don't like is we go, that's wrong, that's bad, shouldn't be happening, they shouldn't be doing that. You know, all those shoulds, mustn't, can't, ought, all those kind of negative directive words. Those are the thoughts that we have. And, you know, for a while there was this movement towards positive thinking, and everyone said, oh, what you do to get rid of judgment is you just stop thinking bad thoughts. You just turn it around and say, I'll make something positive out of it. But then people realized that was just putting a band-aid on, and it didn't really work anyway. So I think the first thing is just to acknowledge that to judge is to be human, and to be human is to judge. It's okay. It's part of who we are, and not go into judgment about ourselves for being in judgment, because that's the first thing that happens. Is people start to get this idea that if I stopped judging, then I might be happier, I might be less reactive, I might be able to be kinder. I might actually just find that there were less things to judge in my life. And that's all of that is true. But then they start going, right, so from now on, I'm not going to judge anymore. I'm going to be kind and loving about everybody, even if I don't like what they're doing. And of course, within 5 minutes, they're tripping themselves up and they have spotted a judgment that they're having. Honestly, the first thing to do to start releasing judgment is just to notice that you're doing it. It really is the hugest step, just to notice that all the time you're walking down the street going, oh, look at her, look at what she's wearing, that doesn't suit her, why is she wearing that? Or you're going, oh, they shouldn't be behaving like that, those politicians, they're disgusting, you know, and you're going into judgment. The first thing is just to notice it, catch yourself doing it and go, I was just having a judgment then. That's okay. That's part of being a human. And then you might start to ask yourself, as you did, Anne, the question, what would happen if I didn't automatically go into judgment, or if I could start to see that famous bigger picture here? What if actually I could step into something called compassion instead of judgment? And for me, this is always like step 2 after noticing it. And being perfectly okay about what I'm feeling. It's like, I don't like that thing. I'm afraid I just don't. There it is. Don't like it. And I'm sorry. I wish I did, but I don't. And then I could start to go, well, what if that person's behaving that way because something terrible happened to them? And they're just really frustrated, or they're really angry, or they've been brought up in a, you know, they've had a terrible time in their childhood and they just have never resolved it. What if that person shouted at me because actually I pressed a button in them that needed healing? What if, you know, we start to ask those questions again. What if there's something else going on here? Why am I being so judgmental about that? Why is it triggering me? Why is it pressing my buttons? What's going on inside me that's making me feel so angry or frustrated or sad or wounded by this? You know, then we start to get back on the track of, maybe I need to look at myself here. So, you know, the first thing is we notice it, and then we start to be a little bit more compassionate towards the other person if we can. And like you said, Anne, it's, you know, it's all a pathway. It's all a journey. We're not expecting perfection at any point. But even one step in the direction of love, of compassion, of understanding, of finding peace with a situation is going to not only make us feel better, but it's also not going to contribute to the soup of negative energy out there in the world. And I kind of think, you know, a lot of the times when we're firing judgments and blame and negative thoughts out there a lot, we do create something in the bigger kind of sphere of energy in the world. When we focus more on coming back into that heart center that we talked about earlier, and when we focus, when we drop in, when we take a moment, when we take a breath, take a pause and just ask, is there something else that I could be doing here? Is there something else I could notice here? Is there something I could learn here? You know, when we ask those questions, we can then find more balance within ourselves, and we then start to contribute that we start to contribute compassion and love and balance and harmony out into the world. You know, that's been one of my biggest overriding kind of intentions on my path, on my journey, and one of my biggest kind of pulls, if you like, drives to stay on the spiritual path has been that I'm not just doing this for me, that I'm doing this for something greater, that I'm doing this for, you know, that when we do this for everyone and for the world at large. And that might sound a little bit overblown, but I happen to believe that that's true. And it means, you know, the other thing about judgment and about all of this is that if we can stop the judgment in its tracks, or at least recognize it when it comes up, we stop being quite such navel gazers and making everything about us. At the end of the day, humans are really fixated on themselves. I mean, we just are, you know, we're kind of obsessed with how the world impacts us. And when we start to notice the judgments and start to think, maybe I could slowly find a different way to be, our focus begins to become broader, and we begin to focus on life and on humanity and on all sentient beings and on the earth herself and on the goodness inherent in the world, rather than being all the time wrapped up in the judgment and the blame and the shame and the guilt and the, you know, the stuff that just makes us small. Judgment makes us small, and the bigger picture and opening up to life and light makes us big. You know, it opens us up.
Yeah, that's lovely. Absolutely. I always say, you know, being curious is good, you know, curious about yourself. Why am I thinking that way? Why do I believe that? And also maybe curious about someone else's struggles and challenges, and that they, you know, we do come from different angles on things, and especially at this time, because we don't all want the same thing at the same time. We, you know, our fears are different, our concerns, our worries, our needs. You know, some people might be desperate to have that family interaction that they can't have at the moment, etc., etc. So it is good to be able to step away from that, definitely. Well, thank you, Korani. Is there any final message you would like to pass on? Any other final words, maybe of anything that you might have coming up, or you know, anything you'd like to say?
Well, firstly, just it's been wonderful chatting with you, Anne. It's been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And in terms of what I've got coming up, I'm just in transition at the moment myself with my work, so I haven't got anything literally planned at the moment, but I know that there's things bubbling up. And we talked at the beginning before we started recording this call, and we had a quick conversation about timing and about allowing things to arise in perfect timing. I always say perfect divine timing. And one of the things I've learned over the years is how to wait when the timing isn't right, and to allow what's next to bubble up through me rather than trying to make it happen. So I'm in that place at the moment of waiting for the next thing to arise. It's bubbling, but it's just not there just yet. So that for me is a message from the universe that I've just come out of a really busy time, and maybe I need a little bit of that being space. Absolutely. And in that being space, there's going to be room for the next thing to drop in for me. I think what I'd like to finish on, though, Anne, is just something that occurred to me when we were talking earlier about the bigger picture. And it's something that I'll use quite often in my workshops and in my, of course, I've written a few books as well, which is another one of my passions. And that's something else I really wanted to do, is to do another book at some point soon. But one of the things I'll often talk about is, what if life, the universe, was actually on your side? What if the universe actually has got your back all the time, always, no matter how it looks? You know, and it's something that I've used that's really helped me along my journey. Has been, it comes back to trust, doesn't it? Trust in the nature of the goodness of the nature of life itself, really, that actually whatever is happening is to some degree perfect, and that we are always guided and supported, and it's kind of being open to that, I guess, that is the key.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to firstly to finish, but also another great bit of advice to ask that question, what if the universe does have our backs? Definitely. And how can people find you? I believe you've got a website.
I have got a website. My website is just korani.net. So it's KORANI.net, N-E-T. Excuse my broad New Zealand accent, which might make people think it was not net, but something else.
Well, thank you for your time. The things I'd just like to add is you are an absolutely amazing writer. So if anybody has an opportunity to dip into any of your books, which I believe are available through your website,
Yes,
then please do so, because honestly, your writing is phenomenal. And also, again, once you're doing some more workshops, if anybody has an opportunity to attend one of your, which are probably going to be Zoom for a little while, one of your Zoom workshops, then definitely, if you feel the urge to do that, then definitely give it a go, because it's going to be amazing. And I've thoroughly enjoyed today, and I hope that you'll come back. Actually, sometimes I feel like we could talk about so much more, but also, you know, thank you also for everything that you've done to help me through my experience, and to lead me in quite gently, which is probably what I needed at the time, because it was a bit of a whirlwind for me, and everything that you do for everybody else, because it is just incredible, and you do it with such wonderful sort of energy and calm and wisdom that I think there's so much to share. So thank you very much.
Oh, and thank you so much for those very, very kind words. I really appreciate it. And just thanks for the opportunity.